Hey guys, Will here. So today I wanted to talk about 5 things that I think could be improved in iRacing. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the general driving experience, some little characteristics that I've noticed in driving most cars in the service, as well as the online experience too. So racing with other people and some things that I think could be improved around that experience, and just talking about the game in general. Now, this isn't intended to be any sort of a hit piece against iRacing. I don't want to sort of turn it into a this sim versus that sim debate or anything like that, but I just wanted to give a little bit of feedback here for some things that I've noticed in my couple of years of using the service. And I'd like to open up the discussion for you guys as well in the comments to see whether you guys agree with my observations, whether you guys have anything that you would add on top as well. So let's get started straight away. Let's get into the 5 things that I would like to see improved. All right, let me get my headphones on here quickly so I can hear what you guys are hearing, and let's talk about traction loss and how it's communicated through the force feedback system in the game. Now, I want to preface this by saying that this isn't related to any particular wheelbase. This is something that I've noticed across the entire spectrum of wheelbases that I've tested, from the G27 through CSL Elite, Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5, and a bunch of direct drive wheels, all the way up to the SimiCube 2 Ultimate that we've got on the rig here as well. So it's not related to any particular wheelbase. Some wheelbases will communicate this better or worse than others, but this is something that I've noticed across the entire spectrum. So anytime the back end of the car is moving around, whether it's under lift off oversteer or power sliding, any condition where the back end of the car is squirming around or sliding at all, what I find is that the communication of what the rest of the car is doing tends to lack a little bit in the steering. So you can feel the car sliding around, you can feel the back end skating, and you feel that kind of correction or the steering swinging around with the back of the car, and that allows you to catch slides pretty well. But what I find is that any sort of understeer or any sort of communication through the front wheels, other than the sensation of the back end of the car moving around, is kind of lost. The steering becomes quite light and feels quite disconnected. So we'll just give you a little bit of an example here. We'll just do a bit of a power slide on cold tires here. And straight away, like, I've got nothing going on in my steering at all when the car's sliding. So, I mean, obviously this is an extreme kind of example, but even if I kind of get into a donut here, there's just not really anything going on in the steering at all, other than the fact that the car's kind of rotating. So let's just rev up again, we'll slide around again. And yeah, like, I mean, I'm not feeling any sort of other texture in the feedback at all. I'm not feeling the road texture, even though it's there. Like, I can feel it now, once I'm up and running again. But again, if we get the power down, do a little bit of a tire warm sort of scenario here. As soon as that back end starts to snake at all, you get this lightness in the steering. And if we gun it through our rouge here on cold tires, this is probably going to be a pretty good example. So as soon as that car starts sliding, as soon as that car starts sliding, you just lose all other sensation in the force feedback. And that makes it hard to kind of feel what's going on, feel whether you're running up on ripple strips. And even though you can catch the back end of the car just by kind of feeling where the grip point comes back, it just does tend to give you a bit of a disconnected feeling. Now, this is of course going to vary depending on the type of car that you're driving. And something like a 911 Cup car that doesn't have any sort of traction control or ABS is obviously going to be a bit more of a problem than others. But I have also noticed it with a lot of other cars that I've driven too. The Cayman, for example, that does have traction control. But anytime that traction control kicks in, the steering just starts to feel disconnected and light, and you just lose that communication of what the rest of the car is doing. So I think that what's happening here is the telemetry that's being used to generate that effect is kind of overpowering the other effects, or maybe those other effects are being lifted out of the force feedback to generate that. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I would love to see that improved so that you just do get that sense of communication through the steering regardless of what the back end of the car is doing. So next on my list is contact dynamics, or what happens when you make contact with other cars inside the game. Now, this isn't to be confused with netcode directly, although netcode obviously does have an overall influence on what happens when you do touch other cars in iRacing. But just for those who might be a little bit confused about exactly what netcode is, we'll talk about that first, and then we'll get into the contact. So netcode is essentially the game's way, and it has to happen in pretty much every single game to allow for the latency between different players. So say, for example, I'm here in Australia, I generally have about a 300 millisecond ping compared to players inside in the European region, which means that what's happening on my screen, or what's happening for me in real time, is about 300 milliseconds or 0.3 of a second behind what's going on for the Europeans. So you can imagine that creates a problem for the game, because it needs to sort of create some sort of a middle point where, you know, I'm not lagging out and causing problems for people that are behind me, and, you know, so forth. So it kind of has to determine what's going on around you based off that latency. And the way it does that is by interpolating the data, or essentially you know, sort of trying to recreate what it thinks would be going on should there be zero ping between the players. So there's always going to be a little bit of weirdness that goes on whenever you have a player that has a high ping, and it's not really the game's fault that that takes place. It's just, it just is what it is. So I wanted to make sure that was clear first, but I wanted to go back into a replay file from a race that we did in the PESC All-Stars series a couple of weeks ago at Road Atlanta in the Cayman GT4, because this is a really good example of what I mean when it comes to my issue with contact dynamics. And again, it kind of relates back to what we were talking about with general traction loss before. So let's just roll the replay here. I'll hit play. And this was an overtaking move that I was doing on another racer coming into the final chicane. So I was in front and I got a little tap on the outside, and you can see here I just went into an instant spin and then ended up collecting most of the field behind me as well, or one of the drivers at least. So if we have a look at the external view here, it tells us a little bit more of what was going on. This is my frustration. So we can see here I'm going for an overtake down the inside. My car's positioned ahead and I've got the apex at this point. And the other car has unfortunately kind of turned in a little bit on me, giving me a little bit of a tap on the side. Nothing major, and you can see there it's only just a very small little glance there. But immediately, as soon as that contact's made, you can see my car starts to rotate. I'm now completely out of control. I have no control over what the car's doing at all. The car's spinning on me, and because we're playing in slow motion, it's a little bit hard to read, but my steering has gone completely light by this point. So I'm sliding sideways here. You can see I'm not on the brakes yet either. And I've started to tap the brakes just a little bit to try and straighten the car up, and then poor Dan Suzuki that was behind me has just driven straight into the back of me. He had absolutely nowhere to go. So the problem here is that in a real car, even at speed, if you make a little bit of contact like that, that's not what's going to happen. The car's not going to just completely become completely out of control. You're not going to completely lose any feeling in the steering and any ability to catch the car at all. I was sitting on traction control as well, trying to sort of balance the car out. And, you know, as soon as you have that contact, the car just goes completely out of control. You've got no way of catching it again, and you're just a complete passenger. So netcode aside, and netcode really wasn't an issue in that particular incident at all. You can see as soon as that contact was made, complete loss of control, no chance of catching the car again. And that is definitely something that I think could be improved in iRacing's physics. It just seems to be that you can't battle door to door. You can't have those close quarters battles. So again, looking at it from my onboard here, you can see as soon as I got the tap, my car's just completely out of control, and there's absolutely nothing that I can do from that point forward. So that is my biggest issue, I think, with iRacing, because obviously when you've got a game that's based around online racing, you need to be able to battle door to door. You need to be able to be close to other cars. And obviously you do need to compensate for netcode and those sort of latency issues that are always going to be there. But you could see in that particular incident, netcode wasn't an issue at all. There was no problem with contact and the way that contact actually happened. It was what actually happened after that contact and the behavior through the car just kind of going into an instant spin, an instant loss of control, instant loss of force feedback, which was, you know, the end result of me not being able to catch the car. And maybe I'm completely wrong here. I've never been in an accident in a race car, thankfully, where I've had contact with another car. So I don't know exactly what happens, but I feel like under conditions like that, if you had a slight little glancing blow, you'd get a little bit of compression in the suspension. The car might get a little bit unsettled, but you're certainly not going to have a complete loss of control. You're not going to be completely disconnected from the feeling in the steering, and the car's not just going to loop around on you with nothing that you can do to catch the car again. That's my opinion, at least, on the situation. So I think that's the cause of a lot of big accidents in iRacing that are unnecessary. You get a car that spins because of something like that, ends up taking out the rest of the field. And we actually saw that in the last race that we did in the PESC All-Stars at Canada as well. Gamer Muscle had an incident where he had a little bit of contact, got spun around from that contact, and again, it looked like it shouldn't have really happened that way. It didn't look like it was something that would actually have spun the car around. And then unfortunately, his car was stranded in the middle of the track and left nowhere to go for the rest of the field, basically. So I think that a lot of these incidents that end up wiping out a large portion of the field could be avoided by some improvements to car-to-car content. And if we look at some of the other sims, AMS2, for example, I don't think that that's got the best physics in the world by any means. There's a lot of things that do feel quite arcade about that game, but that's one thing that I do feel like they've gotten right, at least in the cars that I've tested out. When you do rub doors with other cars, you tend to sort of get a little bit of compression in the suspension. You can kind of work with it, but it doesn't just put you into an instant spin and take you out of the race. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so next on my list is, you've probably already guessed it, penalties and the penalty system in general. Now, I have seen some improvements to this over the 2 years that I've been playing iRacing, but I do still think that we do have a bit of a problem. It tends to be a little bit polarizing, but the bottom line for me is, at least if I did that to somebody in a real race against real cars, and this is just an AI race, I would expect that I would be penalized and they shouldn't be penalized for that. That is not their fault. That is 100% on me, and they should not be receiving penalty points for that. Now, the argument against is, of course, that in real life, when you get damaged, you're responsible for the repair bill, and I get that, but the reality is, you know, real life racing is real life racing. Sim racing is not real life, and people want to do sim racing because they want to have fun. You want to come in, you want to be able to have a good time. People are trying to build up their I ratings. People are trying to build up their safety ratings. And the last thing you want is some dickhead like me driving up the inside, and this car is absolutely ruined. But the last thing you want to have is some idiot doing that and ruining your race, and you end up getting penalized for it. You end up losing safety rating. You can't get the license that you wanted to get into the round that you wanted or the race that you wanted. And yeah, it's just unnecessary. And I feel like there must be a way that we can detect when somebody's, you know, gone up the inside, just careened into the back of somebody, even if it's something as simple as whether or not the car in front is holding its line or not, something like that. I mean, if you've defended aggressively and moved into the path of another car, then obviously there's a element of liability on you as well. But if you're just holding your line, you're just doing your own thing, minding your own business, and somebody rams straight up the back of you, in my opinion at least, you shouldn't be receiving any penalty points for that. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so we're back in the pits now, cars being repaired. So let's talk about the next thing on my list. So it kind of leads into what we were just talking about in a sense, but I would love to see a bit of an overhaul of the lobby system. Now, we talked about this a little bit in a video that I did a few weeks ago. In that video, we talked about the attitudes towards sim racing and the fact that different people are sim racing for different reasons. Some people take it seriously. Some people just want to have a bit of fun. Some people want to just take everybody out. And you know, other than the wanting to take people out thing, they're all valid reasons for wanting to get involved and wanting to have fun. And what happens is when you combine all those different types of incentives or motivations for wanting to sim race in the first place into one lobby, you end up with a whole lot of anger, a whole lot of frustration, and a whole lot of finger pointing going on. So we asked in the comments for people's suggestions, and one of the things that came up quite a few times, which I really liked, and something that I'd actually thought about previously as well, is having the option for more casual lobbies within the events themselves. So typically speaking, in iRacing, you've got different lobbies that you need to unlock through the license system. So certain classes might only be available when you reach certain licenses and so forth. What that means is you have no option but to compete within that particular class with all those other drivers as well. So what I would love to see is, in addition to the normal structure that we have in iRacing right now, where you have to actually progress through the licenses to gain access to the different classes, what I would love to see is the ability to access anything that you want, any content that you want, and any content that you've paid for, more importantly, in some sort of a casual lobby system, kind of like what we have in Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example. So you have the option to play in those cars if you want to, drive on those tracks if you want to, and experience the content that iRacing has to offer, but in a more casual scenario. And what that'll do is that'll divide the races up as well into the lobbies that suit their own driving style and what they're actually wanting to get out of the experience. So all the people that are wanting to have a more instant gratification style sim racing experience can jump in those casual lobbies, they can have a bit of fun, they can get a little bit rough with each other, and it doesn't really matter because you can just go and have another race afterwards. It's not going to impact your licensing, it's not going to impact your I rating, anything like that. You can just jump in, have fun, enjoy the content, and that leaves the serious lobbies to the serious races that are taking it more seriously. So that is my suggestion there. I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments about that as well, but let's move on to the next point. All right, now I know that this isn't something that is a quick fix by any means. I know that it would involve pretty much redeveloping the entire game and the physics engine, everything. I don't know how tied in the graphics are with the physics and everything, but we're in Automobilista 2 now, and you know, this is where we're at in 2021 in terms of graphics and visual fidelity. And I mean, just look at it. I think for the money that we're paying for an iRacing subscription, it really is about time, when you consider what else there is out there and how far the game has changed, how far things have moved on in the years since iRacing first came out. I really do think it's about time that we saw some graphical updates, as well as weather in general. I mean, the wet weather dynamics add a whole new dynamic to racing in general. You've got to pit in, you've got to come in for tires, you've got to manage the grip levels. And I mean, we've even got in games like AMS2 now, the ability to sort of map the water on the track and have to actually hunt around for grip on the circuit, avoid puddles, you know, all those sorts of things, aquaplaning. These are all elements to real life racing which we just don't have in iRacing. And I really do think, you know, again, for the money that we're paying, it's about time we had those things as part of the experience. So that is the last thing on the list. Hopefully you guys have found the video interesting and useful, and hopefully it sparks a bit of discussion. I really would like to hear in the comments what you guys think. What are some of the things that, do you agree with me? Are there things that annoy you that I haven't mentioned? Let us know. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again soon. One more thing, I know that there is ways around it with mapping controls on a button box should you wish to do so, but it's really frustrating when you can't see the UI replay control elements behind a steering wheel. And I know this is a problem for a lot of people, not just me. This is kind of an extreme scenario or an extreme usage case, but please allow us a little snap out control panel where we can get the replay controls and thumbing through cars that we can move around on the screen. Like what we can do with the other overlays when we're driving. I think that would be a big help. Thanks, guys.